In a remote Montana farmland, a lone young orphan's peaceful evening was about to become a living nightmare when the notorious Red River Gang decided to corner their latest target. What these hardened outlaws didn't know was that 15-year-old Jamie Carter had spent the last decade training with special forces in Afghanistan's deadliest regions, and the old barn they planned to trap her in wasn't just a storage space, it was a carefully designed combat zone. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the vast wheat fields as Jamie Carter stood on her weathered farmhouse porch, watching dust devils dance in the distance. Her calloused hands wrapped around a steaming mug of hot chocolate as her eyes methodically scanned the horizon with practiced precision. 3 years of running this farm alone had taught her the importance of vigilance, but it was her earlier life that had honed it into an art. The evening air carried the scent of freshly cut hay and distant wood smoke as Jamie completed her daily security check. The old barn, its red paint faded by countless Montana summers, stood sentinel over the property. Inside, beneath its rustic exterior, lay a sophisticated array of security measures that would have impressed her former mentors. The tools hanging on the walls weren't just for farming, each had been strategically placed, able to transform from agricultural implement to defensive weapon in seconds. Jamie's attention shifted as her trained ear caught the distant rumble of engines. Through the swirling dust, 3 black SUVs appeared on the horizon, their approach deliberate and purposeful. Her expression remained neutral, but her mind was already calculating angles, distances, and response scenarios, just as she'd been taught in places few Americans ever saw. Martinez's trading post, the only store for 20 miles, had warned her last week about the Red River Gang moving through the area. Their pattern was always the same, targeting isolated properties, using overwhelming numbers to intimidate, and taking whatever they wanted. They'd already hit 3 farms in the county, but those farmers hadn't spent their childhood learning combat tactics from the world's most elite warriors. The SUVs pulled into her long driveway, gravel crunching under their tires. Jamie counted 8 men, all armed, their movements betraying military training, but not the sophisticated kind she'd grown up with. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes, surveyed the property with the confidence of someone used to taking what he wanted. "Well, look what we have here," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Didn't know they were letting kids run farms these days." His men spread out, their positioning revealing their intentions before they even spoke. Jamie recognized their formation. Standard intimidation tactics she'd seen used in villages across Afghanistan. Jamie set her mug down with deliberate calm, her movements unhurried. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Her voice carried the kind of quiet confidence that made the leader pause, just for a moment, before his smirk returned. "Name's Cross," he announced, moving toward the porch. "My friends and I were what you might call businessmen. We provide protection for properties in these parts. Insurance, you might say." His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon, a gesture meant to intimidate. 2 of his men had already moved toward the barn, while others maintained their positions, covering angles. They were professionals, Jamie noted, but they'd made a crucial mistake. They thought they were dealing with a scared teenager. "Protection?" Jamie's voice carried a weight that made Cross pause mid-step. Interesting choice of words. Her eyes tracked his men's movements, noting their spacing, their weapons, their weak points, all the things she'd been taught to observe since she was 5 years old. Cross's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Way I see it, young lady, running a farm is dangerous work. Accidents happen, equipment fails, fires start. Small price to pay to ensure everything runs smoothly." Jamie's slight smile carried an edge that would have worried anyone who truly knew her background. "You seem like an intelligent man, Mr. Cross, so I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully." The yard had gone completely silent. Even the evening birds seemed to hold their breath. "I've spent my life learning about threat assessment," Jamie continued, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from experiences no teenager should have had. "The funny thing about threats, the real ones rarely feel the need to announce themselves." Cross's smirk faltered slightly. Something in Jamie's tone, in the steady way she held his gaze, made him reassess the situation. "That's supposed to mean something to me, little girl?" It means, Jamie replied, her smile never wavering, that you should choose your next move very carefully, because right now, you're not seeing the whole picture. The tension in the yard thickened as Cross processed her words. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the farmyard, revealing the subtle changes in his expression as he realized this confrontation might not go as planned. Before we continue this story, tell us where you're watching from, and if this resonates with you, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story will leave you speechless. Cross's fingers drummed against his holster, his earlier confidence giving way to calculation. The evening light caught the scars on his face, testament to a violent past. But something in Jamie's unwavering gaze made him wonder if he was facing something he'd never encountered before. The evening wind carried the scent of rain and distant gunpowder as Cross watched his men move into position around the farmhouse. His worn hands now rested openly on his weapon, the pretense of civility fading with the dying light. You know, he leaned forward, his voice dropping. Funny thing about pictures. Sometimes they ain't what they seem at first glance. Jamie set her mug down with deliberate precision. The soft clink of ceramic on wood carried across the tense silence. 3 years ago, in a mountain valley halfway around the world, she'd learned that moments like these, the quiet before violence erupts, were when the smallest details mattered most. The crunch of boots on gravel drew everyone's attention as Sheriff Mark Davidson's patrol car pulled up, his timing too perfect to be coincidental. His weathered face took in the scene with professional detachment, but his hand rested casually near his weapon. Evening, Jamie, Davidson nodded, moving toward the porch. Thought I'd check in, seeing as we've had some trouble in the county lately. His casual tone belied the tension in his shoulders. Cross's eyes narrowed, darting between Jamie and the sheriff. Well, ain't this cozy? Whole county's one big happy family, huh? Blue Creek Valley takes care of its own, Davidson replied, his voice carrying the weight of authority without aggression. Always has. Jamie's slight smile never wavered. Sheriff Davidson and I go way back. Interesting stories, really. Her eyes tracked Cross's men as they subtly repositioned themselves. Their movements spoke of experience, but not the kind that came from legitimate military service. A fourth vehicle pulled into the yard, an unmarked black pickup. The driver remained inside, engine idling. The message was clear. They had backup. You got a problem with new faces, Sheriff? Cross's voice carried a challenge. Thought this was a free country. Davidson accepted the subtle threat with professional calm. Free country doesn't mean free reign. Property owners here already pay for protection. It's called taxes. Jamie watched the exchange, noting how Cross's companions had subtly shifted their positions. Their movements revealed their experience. These weren't common thugs. Through the kitchen window, she caught the reflection of 2 men trying to circle behind the house. Their approach was practiced, coordinated. Protection's a funny word, Cross mused, his fingers now tapping a deliberate pattern on the porch railing. Jamie recognized it, a silent signal to his men. Means different things to different people. A low rumble of thunder carried across the plains as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The approaching darkness would work in their favor, or so they thought. What they couldn't know was that Jamie had spent years training in conditions far worse than a Montana thunderstorm. Indeed it does, Jamie's voice cut through the tension. For instance, some might say having the most sophisticated security system in 3 counties is a form of protection. Her eyes met Cross's, a silent challenge in her gaze. The kind that's currently recording every move your men make. Cross's hand froze mid-tap, his eyes darting to the seemingly ordinary farm equipment scattered around the yard. Security system? His attempt at dismissal didn't quite mask his concern. What's a couple of cameras got to do with anything? Jamie's smile remained unchanged, but her eyes hardened. You mentioned pictures earlier. Let me paint one for you. She gestured casually to the yard, where Cross's men had paused in their movements. 8 men thinking they've found an easy mark. Instead, they've walked into a situation they don't fully understand. Sheriff Davidson moved closer, his coffee forgotten on the porch railing. Jamie here spent more time in war zones than most veterans, he added quietly. Those weren't summer camps she was attending all those years. Cross's face hardened as he processed this new information. That's supposed to scare us. We're not doing anything wrong, just having a friendly conversation about business opportunities. Of course, Jamie replied, taking another sip of her cooling chocolate. And I'm sure the crates I saw being unloaded at the old Miller warehouse last night were just supplies for your community organizing. Cross's facade cracked slightly, genuine surprise flickering across his scarred features. You got a vivid imagination, girl. But his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Imagination wasn't what earned me commendations for surveillance operations before I was 13, Jamie replied. Amazing what you noticed during early morning farm checks. Sheriff Davidson's hand hadn't moved from his weapon. Interesting you'd mention the Miller warehouse. Had some reports about activity there lately. The backup driver revved his engine, a signal. Cross slid back slightly, his movements careful and controlled. Well, this has been real educational, but we got places to be. The threat in his eyes was unmistakable now. Though I imagine we'll be seeing a lot more of each other, Miss Carter. Real soon. Jamie met his gaze steadily, recognizing the promise of violence in his words. Looking forward to it. The gang backed toward their vehicles, maintaining sightlines until they reached their SUVs. The evening air filled with the roar of engines as they pulled away, their departure marked by squealing tires on gravel. Sheriff Davidson moved to the window, watching until they disappeared around the bend. You just poked a hornet's nest, Jamie. They were going to be trouble anyway, but now... He trailed off, concern evident in his voice. Jamie's eyes turned to the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, a familiar calm settling over her. Years of training had taught her to read threats in the smallest details, the tension in Cross's shoulders, the practiced positioning of his men, the way his right hand kept straying toward his vest. Let them come, Tom, she replied, finally letting some tension ease from her shoulders. Better to show strength early than wait for them to hurt someone else. Sheriff Davidson's office was bathed in late afternoon sunlight as Detective Sarah Parker spread surveillance photos across his desk. The images showed Red River gang members meeting with well-dressed men outside the Miller warehouse, their faces partially obscured, but their body language speaking volumes. 2 weeks of surveillance. Parker tapped one photo showing crates being unloaded under cover of darkness. They're moving something big, but we can't get close enough to confirm what. She pointed to another image, this one capturing a meeting between Cross and an unidentified man in an expensive suit. Jamie sat quietly in the corner, studying the images with practiced precision. Her eyes lingered on the well-dressed figure, noting details others might miss. The man in the suit, she gestured to the shadowy figure. The way he carries himself, the spacing between him and his guards. He's military trained, private security, probably Eastern European. Parker leaned forward, intrigued. How can you be sure? Spent time in joint operations, Jamie replied, her eyes never leaving the photo. Eastern Europeans have a distinctive way of moving in tactical situations, their private security especially. Her mind flashed back to lessons learned in hidden mountain compounds, where every detail could mean the difference between life and death. Sheriff Davidson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Eastern European connection would explain the increase in activity. We've had reports of similar operations starting up in Pine Grove and Cedar Ridge. The implications were troubling. This was bigger than local gang activity. The office door opened as Dr. Emily Chen entered, carrying medical files. Her usual confident demeanor was shadowed by concern. You need to see this. She placed the files on Davidson's desk. 5 overdoses in the last week. The toxicology reports show something new. Synthetic opioids I've never seen before. Jamie's expression hardened. Eastern European pharmaceuticals. They're using the Red River Gang's distribution network to test new products. Her voice carried the weight of experience, remembering similar patterns she'd seen overseas. A knock at the door interrupted them as Deputy Jenny Parker entered, her face tense. We've got trouble at Martinez's trading post. Place was vandalized last night. Davidson stood immediately. Anyone hurt? Maria Martinez is shaken, but okay. Jenny hesitated, glancing at Jamie. They left a message spray-painted on the wall. It says orphans should keep quiet. Jamie's hand moved instinctively to her side, where a concealed knife rested against her ribs. The threat was clear. This wasn't random vandalism. They're escalating, Parker noted, gathering the photos. Testing our response. Dr. Chen moved closer to the window, watching as more unfamiliar vehicles rolled through town. They're getting bolder. I had 2 of them come by the clinic yesterday, asking about our pharmaceutical supplies. Looking to expand their operation, Sheriff Davidson sighed. We need more than circumstantial evidence to move on them. Jamie stood, her movements deliberate. Then let's get some. The warehouse's layout. I can get close enough without being spotted. Old habits die hard. Her slight smile carried an edge that reminded everyone in the room that this wasn't just any teenager. Too risky, Parker argued. If they spot a police K-9 unit... Who said anything about police? Jamie interrupted. I'm just a farm kid taking a walk. Nobody looks twice at that. Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows cruised past the station, its passage noted by everyone in the room. Jamie watched it disappear around the corner, her tactical mind already mapping out scenarios. They made their first mistake at my farm, she continued, watching as Deputy Jenny photographed evidence from the trading post vandalism. Showed their hand too early. Now they're trying to intimidate us, which means they're worried. Parker studied the surveillance photos again. The Russian connection changes things. This is bigger than local gang activity. Exactly. Jamie's voice carried quiet authority. Which is why we need to act now before they fully establish their operation. Sheriff Davidson leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. What exactly are you proposing, Jamie? Simple surveillance, she replied. I can confirm what they're moving without getting close. Years of experience with this kind of thing. She gestured to the images spread across the desk. One positive identification gives you probable cause for a warrant. The office fell silent again, broken only by the distant rumble of motorcycles. Dr. Chen moved to speak, but was interrupted by another knock at the door. Deputy Jenny returned, her face pale, holding up a phone showing a text message with an attached image. Davidson's expression darkened as he passed the phone to Jamie. The photo showed her farmhouse, taken that morning, with a simple message. Time to teach young birds to keep quiet. Jamie's smile had no warmth. Now tell me, Tom, still think we have time to wait? Zeus suddenly tensed, alerting to movement in their blind spot. Victoria spun to find Norton flanking their position, but before he could fire, a dark shape burst from the shadows. Apollo's growl provided split-second warning as more of Frost's men appeared. The night erupted in coordinated violence. Victoria and the dogs moving like a well-oiled machine while Deathstroke provided covering fire main devices in the treatment facility. Deathstroke reported between bursts, they're rigging it to the primary intake. Victoria's radio crackled multiple bombs disarmed at other locations, Norton announced. But we've lost contact with 3 teams Frost is watching. Deathstroke warned he'll trigger that device the second we breach. Victoria studied the facility's layout, her tactical mind, formulating options. Zeus Apollo water infiltration protocol, the dogs immediately moved toward the reservoir's edge. Their specialized training included underwater approaches, a skill learned in maritime operations. Keep them busy. Victoria instructed. Deathstroke, make it look good. Understanding dawned in his eyes, just like old times. I used to do this for a living myself before everything military force recon. He confirmed before the Corps kicked me out. Victoria's smile was grim. Then you know what happens next. Deathstroke nodded, reloading his weapon. Yeah, we give them a show while your dogs do the real work. The night filled with carefully orchestrated chaos, as Victoria and Deathstroke engaged Frost's men. Meanwhile, Zeus and Apollo slipped silently into the water, approaching the facility from an angle no one was watching. 5 minutes, Rob warned. Temperature readings show the device is active. Victoria keyed her radio. All units maintain perimeter. No matter what happens, nothing gets in or out through her scope. She spotted Zeus and Apollo emerging from the water, their dark tactical vests blending perfectly with the shadows years of training were about to pay off ready. She asked Deathstroke. His response was drowned out by an explosion as the dogs made their move. The real fight for Blue Valley's future was about to begin. Night wrapped around Jamie like a familiar blanket as she moved through the shadows near the Miller warehouse. Years of training in Afghanistan's most dangerous regions guided her movements. Careful, deliberate, invisible. Her phone vibrated once. Lieutenant Sarah Connor's message was brief. Thermal imaging shows 8 inside, 2 on patrol. Truck arriving in 20. Jamie smiled slightly. Having an aunt in military intelligence had its advantages, especially one who could direct satellite coverage during her equipment tests. Her attention shifted as footsteps approached, pressing herself against the warehouse wall, becoming one with the shadows as 2 Red River gang members walked past. "Cross wants the shipment moved by dawn," one guard muttered, boots crunching on gravel. "Europeans are getting antsy about the heat from that farm girl," the second guard spat. "Should have handled her already. Getting soft if you ask me." Their voices faded as they rounded the corner. Jamie moved forward silently, her movements guided by years of training in stealth operations. Every shadow, every blind spot was mapped in her mind as she worked her way closer to the warehouse entrance. Through her night vision scope, she counted the guards, professional but predictable in their patterns. A low rumble approached, the truck right on schedule. Jamie tapped her radio twice, signaling Sheriff Davidson's surveillance team. The warehouse door creaked open, spilling yellow light into the darkness. "Let's make this quick," a heavily accented voice ordered. "Phoenix, your men are sure about security?" "Place is clean," Cross's voice replied, now using his real name. "No one's stupid enough to come sniffing around here." Jamie's lip curled slightly. Amazing how often overconfidence led to carelessness. She raised her phone, its specialized camera capturing the exchange of cases between the Europeans and the gang members. A sudden change in the wind made her freeze, sensing movement before she heard it. "Over there!" The shout broke the night's silence. Jamie didn't hesitate. Years of training took over as she moved like smoke through the shadows. The first gang member reached for her, finding himself face down before he registered what happened. The second made it 2 steps before a precise strike dropped him. "Hold position!" The Eastern European's voice carried authority as he aimed a pistol into the darkness. "Come out now, or—" His threat died as Jamie materialized behind him, one of her farm knives pressed against his kidney. "Here's what's going to happen." Jamie's voice was cold steel. "You're going to lower that weapon, or you'll learn why they spent years training me in silent elimination techniques." Cross emerged from the shadows, his own weapon raised. "Should have minded your own business, little girl. Now we've got to make an example." Jamie's laugh held no humor. "Look around you, Phoenix. Your men are down, your European friend is about to lose function in his left side, and you're in my kill box." "You're outnumbered," Cross snarled. "Am I?" Jamie smiled as red laser dots suddenly appeared on Cross's chest. Lieutenant Connor's equipment test apparently included tactical support teams. The night erupted in controlled chaos as Sheriff Davidson's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Federal agents, everyone on the ground." Police vehicles materialized, their lights painting the scene in red and blue. "FBI, nobody move." Agent James Norton emerged from the shadows, leading a tactical team that quickly secured the area. Jamie maintained her position as more gang members were arrested, her knife never wavering from the European's kidney. "Impressive timing," Agent Norton commented, securing the European. "Almost like you knew exactly when to hit them." "Let's just say my retirement location wasn't random," Jamie smiled. "Aunt Sarah flagged unusual traffic patterns months ago. We needed proof of the European connection." "And now?" Norton asked, watching more Red River gang members being led away in cuffs. Jamie's expression hardened. "Now we've kicked the hornet's nest. Cross won't take this lying down, and Victor will be calling in favors." "You should go into protective custody," Norton suggested. Jamie's laugh was genuine. "Agent Norton, I've spent my life training with the world's most elite operators. My protection," she gestured to her concealed weapons and the farm tools that doubled as combat instruments, "works just fine." As dawn broke over Blue Creek Valley, Jamie watched the FBI processing the scene. She knew this was just the beginning. The Red River Gang would retaliate, and the Europeans wouldn't take this loss lightly. But standing there with her training and determination, Jamie felt only anticipation. She'd spent her childhood preparing for exactly this kind of fight. The morning light revealed the true scope of their operation. Not just drugs, but weapons, forged documents, and evidence of human trafficking. Cross had been building an empire right under everyone's nose, using the gang's reputation as cover for something much darker. Jamie, Sheriff Davidson approached, looking at his phone. Martinez's trading post just reported more gang members arriving. They're carrying heavy bags into the back room. Jamie checked her own equipment, mind already formulating plans. Tell Agent Norton to get his teams ready. Tonight we hunt. The autumn wind carried the scent of approaching rain as Jamie moved toward her truck. She'd been trained for this since she was 5 years old, raised by operators who saw her potential and molded her into something unique. Cross thought he'd found an easy target, a young orphan alone on a farm. Instead, he'd started a war with someone trained by the very best to dismantle organizations exactly like his. Morning light streamed through the broken windows of Martinez's trading post, illuminating the devastation inside. Overturned shelves, shattered merchandise, and broken glass littered the floor. On the wall, spray-painted in harsh red letters, "First Warning." Jamie stood in the center of the destruction, her trained eyes scanning for details others might miss. Maria Martinez worked silently behind her damaged counter, refusing to let tears fall as she swept up broken merchandise. "Insurance will cover it," Maria's voice wavered slightly. "But they said next time it won't just be property damage." Sheriff Davidson photographed the scene while Detective Parker interviewed witnesses outside. The front window displayed a clear boot print, size 11, military-issue sole pattern. "They're escalating faster than expected," Jamie noted, examining a shelf that had been deliberately torn from the wall. Her attention fixed on something others had missed. The angle of destruction seemed designed to hide something more specific. "Jamie," Dr. Chen's voice carried urgency as she arrived, medical bag in hand. 6 more overdoses last night. Different chemical composition than before. They're flooding the streets with new product, testing reactions. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up outside, its windows tinted beyond legal limits. The man who stepped out moved with military precision. Medium build, expensive suit, cold eyes scanning everything. Viktor Petrov had arrived personally. "You've disrupted a very profitable arrangement." Petrov's accent was subtle, cultured. He addressed Jamie directly, ignoring law enforcement. "Perhaps we could discuss compensation for your retirement." Jamie turned slowly, her posture relaxed but ready. "Interesting choice of words," she replied, "considering your last shipment included more than just pharmaceuticals." Petrov's smile never reached his eyes. "Business is business, but now it's personal, you understand? Examples must be made." "Like the vandalism?" Jamie's voice carried deadly calm. "Sloppy. Real professionals would have noticed the surveillance equipment Maria installed last month." Sheriff Davidson moved closer, hand on his weapon. "Mr. Petrov, you're interfering with an active investigation." "Investigation?" Petrov laughed softly. "You have small-town problems, Sheriff. Don't involve yourself in international matters." A motorcycle's roar shattered the tension as Cross pulled up, his gang colors displaying new patches, Eastern European symbols. "Place looks better this way," Cross sneered, surveying the damage. "Shame about the timing, though. Almost like someone knew we were coming." Dr. Chen emerged from treating Maria, her face tight with anger. 3 kids are dead because of your product. How many more before you're satisfied?" "Collateral damage," Petrov dismissed. "Market testing requires data." Detective Parker approached, her eyes wide at the scene. "How did you—" "Never underestimate someone trained by the world's best," Jamie replied calmly. The European glared at her from across the room. "You have no idea what you've started." Petrov's voice held genuine menace. Jamie shifted position slightly, preparing for what she knew would come next. "Wrong. I know exactly what we've started. The question is, does your employer know his operation is compromised?" Agent Norton approached, his FBI tactical gear still pristine. "We've got crates of synthetic opioids, Eastern European military hardware, and what looks like chemical weapons precursors. This is bigger than we thought. It usually is, Jamie straightened, watching as Cross fingered the weapon under his jacket. But they made a crucial mistake. What's that? Parker asked. They thought an orphan raised by special operators was an easy target. Never stopped to ask why someone with my training chose to live next to their main transport route. Sheriff Davidson joined them, holstering his weapon. You've been watching them since before you bought the farm. Jamie's eyes tracked subtle movements around the room, gang members shifting positions, hands straying toward weapons. You're getting sloppy, Victor. Military hardware, chemical weapons, testing street drugs on American kids. Somebody higher up won't like this attention. Petrov's composure cracked slightly. You know nothing. I know your bosses in Europe prefer subtlety. Jamie's smile was predatory. Wonder how they'd react to learning you're running cowboy operations with backwater gangsters. Cross stepped forward aggressively, but stopped short as Jamie's hand moved to her hip, where he knew she carried one of her farm tools, instruments that doubled as precise weapons. You've made your point. Petrov's voice hardened. Now hear ours. Blue Creek Valley belongs to us now. The Red River Gang is our distribution, our enforcement. This little show of defiance ends today. Jamie's laugh was genuine. You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you? 10 years of special operations training, specializing in dismantling organizations exactly like yours. Organizations like mine bury people like you, Petrov replied coldly. Try it. Jamie's voice was steel. I haven't had a proper challenge in months. Agent Norton cleared his throat. Mr. Petrov, perhaps we should continue this discussion at the federal building. No need. Petrov straightened his jacket. My associate and I were just leaving, but remember, Miss Carter, you can't watch everyone all the time. As if on cue, Jamie's phone buzzed. The message from her aunt chilled her blood. Fire reported at Chen's clinic. Red River Gang spotted leaving the scene. Petrov's smile widened at Jamie's expression. Like I said, you can't be everywhere. The Mercedes and motorcycles roared away as emergency vehicles screamed past, heading for the clinic. Jamie watched them go, her tactical mind already formulating responses. He's right about one thing, she said quietly to Davidson. We can't protect everyone. What's your play? Davidson asked, knowing that look in her eyes. Jamie's hand moved to her concealed blade, the one her trainers had given her on her 12th birthday. Time to show them why special operations candidates are chosen young. They want to escalate? Fine. Let's escalate. Dusk settled over Blue Creek Valley as Jamie positioned herself near the old Miller warehouse, its rusted metal walls casting long shadows in the fading light. The basement command center, temporarily established in Sheriff Davidson's hunting cabin, hummed with activity. Lieutenant Sarah Connor's laptop displayed thermal imaging of 3 warehouses while Agent Norton briefed his tactical teams. Satellite confirms movement at all 3 locations. Connor pointed to heat signatures on the screen. Main shipment coming through the lumber mill. Petrov is personally overseeing this one. Jamie checked her equipment, the familiar weight of her tactical gear bringing back memories of training sessions in hidden mountain compounds. I'll lead the mill team. Based on their patterns, they'll expect us to hit the warehouse first. Sheriff Davidson spread a map across the table, marking police positions. Mayor Thompson wants hourly updates. He's nervous about this level of federal presence. He should be. Detective Parker entered, carrying fresh intelligence. Found something interesting in the mayor's financial records, large deposits from an Eastern European shell company. Jamie's expression hardened. How deep does this go? Deep enough that Thompson scheduled an emergency town council meeting tonight, Parker replied, conveniently drawing most of our local officers away from the operation. Outside, engines roared as Red River Gang members patrolled the streets, growing bolder and more aggressive, marking their territory. 3 teams, Agent Norton outlined the plan. Jamie takes the mill, Parker leads the warehouse raid. I'll handle the storefront operation. Jamie's phone buzzed. A message from Maria Martinez. More gang members arriving. They're carrying heavy bags into Thompson's office. Change of plans, Jamie announced, her mind already calculating new angles. If they're moving hardware through the mayor's office, we need to adjust our approach. We can't hit the mayor without proof, Davidson warned. Watch us, Parker countered. I'm not losing more kids to their product testing. Jamie moved toward the door, her movements carrying the fluid grace of someone trained in stealth operations since childhood. Sarah, maintain satellite coverage. Sheriff, get your trusted deputies in position. Norton, your teams have authorization? Norton confirmed. Director's given us green light after the clinic bombing. The night air carried the scent of pine and distant motorcycle exhaust as Jamie led her team toward the lumber mill. Through her earpiece, Connor's voice provided updates. Thermal shows 14 inside the mill, 3 snipers on the roof. Petrov just arrived with additional security. Jamie signaled her team to hold position as she studied the mill's layout. The architecture was familiar, similar to buildings she'd trained in overseas. Movement at the mayor's office, Parker reported through the radio. Thompson is meeting with someone. Wait, it's Cross. Suddenly, explosions rocked the night, not at their targets but at the police station, courthouse, and power station. Emergency generators kicked in as Blue Creek Valley plunged into darkness. They're trying to divide our resources, Jamie realized. The shipment's a diversion. Through the chaos, Connor's voice remained calm. Satellite shows a helicopter approaching. Eastern European diplomatic markings. This isn't about drugs or guns, Jamie's mind raced. The whole operation, it's about something bigger. Through her tactical radio, she heard Cross speaking in a language few would recognize, but one she'd learned years ago in those mountain compounds. Sarah, tell Norton to forget the other targets, she commanded. Get everyone to the mill now. How can you be sure? Davidson asked. Because Cross just ordered his men to load the package before American intelligence can track it, Jamie translated. He's running an extraction, not a delivery. The night erupted in gunfire as Red River Gang members engaged police units across town. Through her scope, Jamie watched Mayor Thompson hurriedly loading documents into a car. Parker, take the mayor, she ordered. Dead or alive, he doesn't leave town. The mill's loading bay door opened, revealing an 18-wheeler backed into position. Federal agents! Norton's voice boomed through bullhorns. The building is surrounded. Petrov's response was immediate. Heavy automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, but Jamie had already moved, her years of training guiding her team through blind spots in the defenders' coverage. Stand down all units, Mayor Thompson's voice cut through her radio. By executive order, this is now under town jurisdiction. Negative, Norton countered. Federal operation remains in effect. Jamie spotted Thompson approaching the mill, flanked by uniformed officers she didn't recognize. Last chance, Miss Carter, Thompson called out. Walk away. Enjoy your quiet farm life. Some fights aren't worth dying for. Jamie's laugh carried across the compound. Funny, I was about to say the same thing. A single shot rang out. Thompson slumped, and behind him, Petrov lowered his rifle. Consider that my resignation letter, his accented voice carried clearly. Blue Creek Valley belongs to us now. The only question is how many more have to die before you understand that. Jamie keyed her radio as she moved to cover. All units engage. Shoot to kill. The night dissolved into chaos as federal agents clashed with gang members and Eastern European operatives. But through the mayhem, Jamie smiled grimly. They still hadn't figured it out. This was exactly the proof they needed. Sarah, she spoke quietly into her radio. Tell me that satellite caught everything. Every frame, her aunt confirmed, including the diplomatic chopper. State Department's already been notified. Jamie shifted position, drawing on years of training in close-quarters combat. Now let's show them how we dealt with terrorists in Afghanistan. Dawn painted Blue Creek Valley's streets in shades of red as emergency vehicle lights reflected off broken glass and shell casings. The lumber mill still smoldered, thick smoke carrying the acrid smell of burned chemicals. Jamie stood near the command vehicle, her tactical gear showing signs of the night's combat. 4 officers down, Sheriff Davidson reported grimly. 2 critical. Dr. Chen set up a triage center in the high school gymnasium. Jamie studied the thermal imaging on Sarah Connor's laptop, watching heat signatures scatter across town. "They're not retreating," she observed. "They're repositioning." Her trained eye caught patterns in their movement that others might miss. "Got something." Connor enhanced satellite footage of the diplomatic helicopter. "That's not just any European bird. That's FSB, Foreign Intelligence Service." Detective Parker joined them, her uniform stained with blood from helping wounded officers. "Thompson's office is a gold mine. Found documents linking him to intelligence operations across 3 states. It was never about drugs or guns." Jamie's voice carried the weight of realization. "That was just cover for something bigger." The radio crackled with Dr. Chen's voice. "We need more supplies. Red River Gang hit our medical convoy." Gunfire erupted from the direction of Town Hall. Through her scope, Jamie spotted gang members fighting each other, some wearing new patches, others maintaining their original colors. "They're fracturing," Davidson observed. "Cross has lost control." "Or someone's making a play for power," Jamie countered, her eyes scanning the chaos with practiced precision. Years of training had taught her to look past the obvious conflicts to find the real threats. A fuel truck approached, its movement catching Jamie's attention. Something about the driver's behavior triggered warnings ingrained by years of tactical training. "Clear the area!" Her command carried through radio channels. The truck exploded seconds later, sending flames into the early morning sky. "They're trying to destroy evidence," Agent Norton concluded, joining them at the command center. "But of what?" Connor's fingers flew across her keyboard, cross-referencing Thompson's files with satellite data. "Got it. The Europeans weren't just using Blue Creek Valley for distribution. They were mapping critical infrastructure, power grids, water treatment, communications. They're gathering intel for potential attacks," Parker read over her shoulder. Jamie's phone buzzed. A message from Maria Martinez. "Petrov was here, said to give you a message. Ask your aunt about Operation Blacklight." Connor's face went pale. "That's classified. How did they—" "Explain," Jamie demanded. "It's a war game scenario," Connor answered. "Military response to widespread infrastructure attacks. I helped design it." "They didn't infiltrate Blue Creek Valley to sell drugs," Jamie pieced it together. "They needed access to study our response protocols. The Red River Gang was just muscle, a distraction." A black SUV approached slowly, its window lowering to reveal Petrov's cold smile. "Very good, Miss Carter. Though you're still missing pieces." "Like what?" Davidson demanded. "Ask yourself why this town." Petrov's smile widened. "What's hidden in these mountains that's worth all this attention?" Understanding dawned in Jamie's eyes. "The Federal Emergency Response Bunker. Blue Creek Valley's built on top of a Cold War fallback facility. Connected to similar installations across the country," Petrov confirmed. "Now mapped, studied, and compromised. Your aunt's war games provided the perfect blueprint." "Why tell us this?" Norton's hand moved toward his weapon. "Professional courtesy," Petrov replied. "And because in 30 minutes, it won't matter. Cross's men are already in position. The Red River Gang's final act will be quite explosive." Connor's laptop beeped urgent warnings. "Multiple bombs detected. They're targeting power substations across 3 states." "You see," Petrov continued, "sometimes the best way to test a system's weaknesses is to watch it burn. Thank you for the entertainment, Miss Carter. Do give my regards to your trainers." The SUV accelerated away as Jamie's mind raced through options, drawing on years of combat training. "Sarah, get me everything on those substations. Sheriff, we need every available unit. Norton, call in federal backup." "It'll never get here in time," Parker warned. Jamie checked her equipment, a familiar calm settling over her. "Then we do this the old way." Her voice carried quiet authority. "They think this is over. They think they've won. But they forgot something crucial." "What's that?" Davidson asked. Jamie's smile was predatory. "In Afghanistan, my trainer specialized in hunting bombers, and I never lost a target." As emergency sirens wailed across Blue Creek Valley, Jamie moved with deadly purpose. The real war was just beginning, and she had 10 years of specialized training ready to deploy. Petrov thought he was burning their system to study it. He was about to learn why some fires bite back. Through her tactical radio, Jamie heard Cross's men engaging each other across town, their unity shattered by competing loyalties. But she remained focused on the larger threat. The bombs meant to test America's emergency response systems. This wasn't just about Blue Creek Valley anymore. This was about preventing a blueprint for chaos from falling into enemy hands. Red digits counted down on the bomb's display as Jamie studied its construction at the power substation. Her mind flashed back to training sessions in Afghan mountains, where she'd learned to identify not just devices but the intentions behind them. First device located, she reported through her radio. Eastern European military grade but modified. They've added something to the explosive compound. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the comm. The overdose victims, their blood work showed traces of a unique chemical marker. They weren't just testing drugs, they were perfecting a dispersal mechanism. These aren't just bombs, Jamie realized, carefully examining the device's construction. They're chemical weapons designed to contaminate infrastructure. Sarah Connor's satellite feed showed movement across the region. Multiple Red River gang teams converging on substations, but something was wrong. Through her scope, Jamie watched two motorcycle groups clash at the next target site. One wore traditional gang colors, the other displayed new European patches. Cross's crew is trying to stop the European faction, Sheriff Davidson observed through binoculars. Looks like not everyone signed up for terrorism, Jamie replied, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency as she disarmed the first device. Her attention suddenly shifted as movement caught her eye, a figure approaching with hands raised. "Phoenix," Jamie called out, recognizing Cross's second-in-command. "Didn't expect to find you on this side of the fight." "Cross sent me," Phoenix emerged from the shadows. "Petrov played us. We signed up to run product, not attack our own country." Little late for patriotism, Detective Parker kept her weapon trained on him. "Maybe," Phoenix agreed, "but we know where the rest of the bombs are, and something worse. Petrov has a backup plan." Jamie signaled for him to continue, her training allowing her to read truth in his body language. "Talk fast." "Petrov's got a main device," Phoenix explained. "Makes these look like firecrackers. It's not just about infrastructure. He wants to poison the groundwater, contaminate the whole region." Connor's voice cut through the radio. "Satellite confirms movement at the reservoir. Multiple vehicles, heavy equipment." "How long?" Jamie demanded. 20 minutes tops, Phoenix replied. "Cross is trying to delay them, but—" Gunfire erupted from the reservoir's direction, echoing across town. "Parker, take Phoenix to Norton. Get everything he knows," Jamie ordered. "Sheriff, coordinate with state police, set up a perimeter." "What about you?" Davidson asked. Jamie checked her equipment, muscle memory from years of training taking over. "I'm going hunting." She moved through the darkened streets toward the reservoir, years of combat experience guiding her movements. Silent, efficient, deadly. Through her night vision scope, she spotted muzzle flashes where Cross was holding position near the filtration plant, pinned down by 4 of Petrov's men. Cross spotted her approach, offering a grim nod. "Took you long enough." "Thought you were smarter than this," Jamie replied, taking position behind a concrete barrier. "So did I," he grunted, returning fire. Petrov promised good money, easy work. Should have known better when he started talking about chemical weapons. A European operative moved to better cover, but Jamie was faster, taking him down with practiced efficiency. "Your boys caused a lot of damage," she observed, citing another target. "Yeah," Cross acknowledged. "Time to make it right." "Main device is in the treatment facility," Cross reported between bursts. "They're rigging it to the primary intake." Jamie's radio crackled. "Multiple bombs disarmed at other locations," Norton announced. "But we've lost contact with 3 teams. Petrov is watching," Cross warned. "He'll trigger that device the second we breach." Jamie studied the facility's layout, her tactical mind formulating options. The training she'd received since childhood had prepared her for exactly this kind of scenario. When conventional approaches would fail, creativity became the deadliest weapon. "Keep them busy," Jamie instructed Cross. "Make it look good." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Used to do this for a living myself before everything." Military force recon, before they kicked me out. Jamie's smile was grim. Then you know what happens next. Cross nodded, reloading his weapon. Yeah, we give them a show while you do the real work. The night filled with carefully orchestrated chaos as Jamie and Cross engaged Petrov's men, drawing attention away from her true approach. Through her earpiece, she heard Connor coordinating with federal response teams. Got NSA and CIA assets incoming. Real ones this time. They're not happy about unauthorized foreign operations on American soil. Petrov's teams engaged from multiple positions, but Jamie moved with lethal precision, each movement calculated from years of specialized training. You can't stop this, Petrov called out. Even if you reach us, even if you shut down the program, there are backup triggers in place. The infrastructure will collapse one way or another. Jamie spotted the chemical devices positioned around the yard, insurance that their operation couldn't be stopped without consequences. Choice time, Miss Carter. Petrov's voice carried absolute certainty. Stop the contamination device and trigger the chemical weapons, or try to prevent the chemical release while American infrastructure burns. You can't do both. Jamie assessed her options, years of combat experience telling her there was always a solution, always a way through impossible choices. What came next would remind everyone why children trained by special operators were considered the ultimate wildcards in any operation. The first drops of rain hit the reservoir as Jamie moved toward the filtration plant, her movements precise and calculated. Cross provided covering fire while she analyzed the facility's layout. Her plan was risky, borderline insane, but years of combat experience told her it was their only option. Sarah, what controls the town's water main emergency release systems? She asked through her radio. They're locked down by Petrov's cyber attack, her aunt replied. But the manual control, some things can't be hacked. Jamie smiled grimly as she spotted movement above. Understanding dawned in Dr. Chen's voice through the radio. The chemicals? You're going to flood them out? Better, Jamie replied as she noted multiple hostiles approaching. We're going to use their own plan against them. The reservoir won't have enough pressure, Petrov called out, his fingers still dancing across his console. 10 minutes until total infrastructure collapse. Who said anything about the reservoir? Jamie's voice carried deadly calm. Sarah, what's directly beneath the filtration plant? Her aunt's typing quickened. Old municipal water main. Emergency capacity for She paused. Jamie, that's insane. The pressure would tear the whole facility apart. Exactly, she confirmed, watching more of Petrov's men taking positions. Sometimes the best way to disarm a bomb is to change the conditions completely. Cross's voice cut through the chaos. Got my loyal crew in position. Just say the word. Jamie spotted Norton organizing a final defense around the control room. Their weapons and tactics were impressive, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd planned for conventional responses. That's impossible. Norton's voice carried genuine shock as Jamie executed a series of movements that defied standard tactical approaches. Because I was trained differently, Jamie replied, advancing through the chaos she created. 10 years developing skills while everyone else just read the manuals. Petrov's teams tried to adjust, but Jamie was operating beyond their experience. Every counter-move met empty air as she struck from unexpected angles. Dr. Chen cut in urgently. The chemical samples show something new. These compounds, they're designed to become more volatile when energized, like by an electrical surge from failing infrastructure. Jamie reached the outer perimeter of the control room as rain fell harder. Sarah, what happens to their system if it gets hit with a few thousand gallons of pressurized water? Total shutdown, she confirmed, but the backup triggers will energize the chemicals. Right as they get hit with enough water pressure to disperse them harmlessly, Jamie finished. Understanding spread through their tactical channel as her plan became clear. You'll flood the entire facility, Petrov warned, real concern in his voice now. Destroy everything, including your evidence. Evidence is already secured, Doctor. Chen countered. Multiple copies, multiple locations. This was never about proof. One problem, Norton called out, his teams moving to stop her. You'll never reach the manual release valve. Not with our security protocols. Jamie's laugh carried genuine amusement. Who said anything about me reaching it? She moved like lightning, but not toward the controls. Instead, she hit specific points around the facility, points she'd marked earlier while everyone focused on her direct approach. Secondary charges, she explained as realization dawned on Petrov's face. Set while you were tracking my obvious movements. Another thing about special operations training. We're excellent at misdirection. The charges detonated with precise force, not enough to destroy the facility, but perfect for creating multiple high-pressure breaches. Water erupted from the ground as Jamie's radio crackled with urgent voices. Grid failure initiating, Connor reported. Chemical weapons energizing, Chen added. And that, Jamie stated calmly as chaos erupted around them, is exactly what we wanted. The night dissolved into mayhem as pressurized water met failing electronics and energized chemicals. But through it all, Jamie smiled. Because sometimes the best way to beat a perfect plan was to change every rule they'd based it on. Chemical weapons neutralizing, Chen confirmed through the radio. Water pressure is dispersing and degrading the compounds faster than they can energize. Petrov's operatives struggled to maintain position as their carefully planned operation dissolved into chaos. Norton barked orders, trying to salvage their tactical advantage, but water and failing electronics had changed the battlefield completely. Grid attack failing, Connor reported. Servers are down. Backup triggers inactive. But Jamie, Chen's voice carried sudden urgency. Petrov is moving towards something, some kind of secured case. Through the rain and spray, Jamie spotted their target. Petrov's movements had become urgent, desperate. The case he retrieved from beneath the main console wasn't part of the original operation. Last resort package, Cross warned, his voice carrying over the chaos. Standard European protocol, if the operation fails completely. They ensure nothing remains to trace, Jamie finished, watching Petrov open the case to reveal a device that made her blood run cold. The night's final battle was about to begin, and this time, everyone would learn why children trained in special operations were considered the most unpredictable force on any battlefield. The case opened to reveal a device that made even Norton's face pale. Not a bomb, but something far worse. Biological agent, Dr. Chen recognized the containment protocols. Weaponized version of something from their earlier tests. If that disperses in this weather, the whole valley becomes a hot zone. Jamie moved with liquid grace through the flooding facility, her mind already calculating angles and approaches. Come any closer, Petrov warned, and I ensure this becomes much bigger than a failed black operation. Your government will have no choice but to respond with full force. Norton's teams took up defensive positions, but Jamie noticed their movements had changed. These weren't men protecting an operation anymore. They were containing a threat. Stand down, Petrov, Norton commanded. This wasn't part of the mission parameters. Parameters changed the moment she compromised everything, Petrov replied. But perhaps we can still salvage something useful. How do you think the public will react when a small American town becomes a biological disaster zone? Jamie keyed her radio. Sarah, condition of the water main? Pressure's holding. Why? Reroute everything. Full pressure to my location. Understanding rippled through their tactical channel. Chen's voice carried both appreciation and concern. The water pressure would neutralize the biological agent, but at that range it could kill everyone in the blast radius. Including us, Jamie confirmed. You wouldn't, Petrov challenged. Not even your training would prepare you for suicide tactics. Jamie's smile was grim. You still don't understand what 10 years of special operations teaches you. Sometimes completing the mission is all that matters. She moved with deadly purpose, taking precise positions around the water main controls. Last chance, Jamie called out. Surrender the package or I flood everything with enough pressure to shred metal. Petrov's composure cracked as he realized she wasn't bluffing. You're insane. No, Jamie replied calmly. I was trained to complete the mission no matter the cost. That's what you never understood about special operations candidates. We're not just assets, we're soldiers. Through her radio, Connor's voice carried urgent warning. Federal response 2 minutes out. Jamie, whatever you're going to do. Won't need 2 minutes, she assured her aunt, watching the rain mix with pressurized water. Sometimes the threat of total destruction is more effective than the destruction itself. The night hung suspended between tragedy and triumph as Jamie faced down Petrov, his biological weapon held ready. Interesting position we find ourselves in, Petrov called out, his composure cracking slightly. All your tactical brilliance, your years of experience, and it comes down to mutual destruction. Difference is, Jamie's hand remained steady on her radio trigger. I accepted this possibility years ago. Did your operators sign up for suicide missions? Norton's teams shifted uneasily, their training warring with self-preservation. Through the chaos, Cross's voice crackled over the radio. Got eyes on multiple trigger points. Say the word. Biological agent spreading pattern analyzed, Chen reported urgently. If he releases it in these conditions, the rain will carry it straight to the evacuation zones. Suddenly, new movement caught Jamie's attention. Operators moving with lethal grace, wearing unmarked tactical gear. Their equipment and patterns spoke of serious capabilities. You didn't think we operated without contingencies? Petrov's smile widened. Sometimes the best backup plan is having friends in higher places. Ghost teams, Jamie recognized their movement patterns. She'd trained alongside similar units, the kind that officially didn't exist. Exactly, Petrov confirmed. While you were focused on our obvious operation, other pieces were moving into position. Sometimes the best way to ensure mission success is to plan for failure. Interesting thing about ghost teams, Jamie replied calmly. They only take orders from confirmed command authorities. Sarah, she continued. Her aunt's typing was audible through the radio. Uploading now. Every authorization, every false flag, every illegal order. Already sent to 3 major news outlets and 6 federal oversight committees. Petrov's smile faltered. You're bluffing. Those files were secured. You secured the evidence at the clinic, Jamie corrected. But Sarah's been recording everything since this started, including your admission about manufacturing domestic threats to justify expanded powers. The ghost teams had stopped advancing, clearly receiving new information through their command channels. Jamie recognized the moment their mission parameters shifted. These were professionals who understood the implications of illegal orders. Stand down, Petrov, Norton called out, his own position shifting. Mission's blown. We need to contain this now. Contain? Petrov's laugh held an edge of madness. This was never about containment. It was about proving a point, about showing why we need absolute control. Jamie's finger tensed on her radio trigger, ready to unleash a flood that would destroy everything, including herself, to stop what was about to happen. The next few seconds would determine not just their fate, but the fate of everyone in Blue Creek Valley. And through it all, the rain continued to fall, mixing with pressurized water as Jamie prepared to show everyone why children trained for special operations were considered the most dangerous weapons of all. Package secured, Chen confirmed as dawn painted Blue Creek Valley's sky in shades of gold. Containment holding. Jamie watched as federal teams secured the scene, Petrov and his operators taken into custody while Norton surrendered without resistance. The ghost teams, recognizing the truth revealed by Connor's evidence, had switched sides the moment national security was truly at stake. All evidence preserved, Chen announced. Between Sarah's recordings and our chemical analysis, the truth about manufacturing domestic threats for political gain, it all comes out. As cleanup crews worked methodically, Jamie stood quietly observing the aftermath. Sometimes the best victories weren't won with dramatic shootouts or last-minute heroics. Sometimes they were won by careful planning, absolute trust, and the unshakable training that had turned an orphan into one of the most effective operators in the field. Blue Creek Valley would recover, its citizens now aware of how close they'd come to being pawns in someone else's power play. But they'd also learned something crucial, that true protection doesn't come from shadowy agencies or expanded government powers. It comes from people willing to stand up and fight back when necessary. What happens now? Davidson asked quietly. Jamie smiled, watching the sunrise. Now we remember why we serve, not for power but to protect people from exactly this kind of abuse.